Robert Harrison's fist struck my face with the force of a hammer, causing my head to jerk violently to the side. The sharp sound echoed through the mansion's living room, abruptly cutting off the cheerful conversations and soft Christmas music. For a second, the world fell completely silent. 50 people stared at me in horror, their champagne glasses frozen in midair. The lights on the 10-foot Christmas tree twinkled merrily, a grotesque contrast to the blood that was beginning to trickle from my nose. "You clumsy imbecile!" Robert roared, his voice echoing through the room decorated with golden garlands and expensive crystal. "Look what you've done to my shirt. That shirt costs more than you earn in a month." The water I had accidentally spilled on him was still dripping onto the Italian marble floor. A simple glass of water. A minor stumble as I walked behind his armchair. "My name is Joseph, I'm 32 years old, and I've just been knocked out by my wife's father in front of the entire Boston elite during the traditional Harrison Christmas party." I touched my nose, feeling it begin to swell. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth as I searched for Michelle among the shocked faces around me. My wife stood by the fireplace, beautiful in her $1,000 red dress, but her face showed no horror at the assault. It showed shame. Shame of me. "Joseph," her voice came out as cold as the December wind outside. "You need to apologize to my father. Now." The words hit me harder than the punch. Around me, whispers began to spread like wildfire. Lawyers, doctors, businessmen, all watching the bricklayer who had the audacity to marry the Harrison princess. "Michelle," I began, my voice coming out hoarse. "Apologize," she repeated, pronouncing each syllable as if she were talking to a child. "Or get out of my house." Robert crossed his arms, his white shirt stained with water as evidence of my crime. The cruel smile on his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about water. It was about power. It was about putting me in my place. I looked around the room once more. No one said a word. None of the guests bothered to question why a 60-year-old man had assaulted someone for spilling water. They just waited to see if I would humiliate myself or have the dignity to leave. For 3 years, I had swallowed every insult, every joke about my profession, every look of contempt. I always thought Michelle would defend me when it really mattered. I always thought our love was stronger than her money. I was wrong. I wiped the blood from my nose with the back of my hand, keeping my eyes locked on Robert's. The silence stretched on for what seemed like an eternity. Then, for the first time in my life, I did something they never expected. I smiled. "You're right," I said calmly, my voice surprisingly steady. "I don't belong here." And I left. No looking back, no slamming doors, no drama. I just walked toward the exit, listening to the murmurs of surprise behind me. What they didn't know was that for the past 6 months, I had been preparing for this very moment. Little signs, interrupted conversations, strange looks, everything pointed to the fact that the Harrisons were planning something to get me out of Michelle's life. If you're enjoying this twist and turn story and don't want to miss what happened when they got home that night, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because as I drove through the snow-covered streets of Boston, they had no idea of the Christmas present I had prepared especially for each of them. During the 20-minute drive to my small house in Somerville, my mind didn't stop for a second. The taste of blood was still in my mouth, but that wasn't what bothered me. It was the memory of how it all began. Robert Harrison was the kind of man who inherited everything and achieved nothing. At 62, he ran a real estate empire built by his father and grandfather, but acted as if he had laid every brick himself. His arrogance knew no bounds, especially when it came to ordinary people like me. 3 years ago, when Michelle and I started dating, he tolerated me because he thought I was just a phase for her. A temporary rebellion by his spoiled daughter against family standards. When she asked me to marry her, Robert laughed in my face. "Do you really think you can support the lifestyle she's used to by building bathrooms for the middle class?" he said, pouring himself a whiskey that cost more than my weekly salary. Michelle had stood by me at the time. She said she loved me regardless of money, that she wanted to build something real with me. But Robert was persistent. He knew exactly how to plant seeds of doubt. Little jabs during family dinners. Comments about how I didn't understand certain things when they talked about investments or international travel. Expensive gifts for Michelle that he knew I could never afford. A $15,000 handbag here, a $20,000 piece of jewelry there. Gradually, I noticed Michelle changing. She began to question why I didn't want to expand my business more quickly. Why I wouldn't take the loan Robert was offering. Why I insisted on doing everything the hard way, when his father could give us a better life instantly. "You're too proud, Joseph," she said more and more often. "Sometimes accepting help isn't failing. It's smart." But I knew Robert Harrison. I knew men like him. His help would come with invisible strings that would become chains the moment I relaxed. The turning point came 6 months ago, during Michelle's birthday. Robert booked an entire restaurant in Back Bay and invited 50 people, all from his social circle. Doctors, lawyers, local politicians. I was wearing my only suit, bought on clearance, while every other man wore clothes that cost more than my car. During his speech, Robert made a point of mentioning how proud he was of Michelle for following her heart, but that he hoped she would eventually find someone who was more her equal. People laughed. They thought it was charming. Michelle smiled and said nothing. It was that night that I began to prepare. Not for revenge, not yet. But for inevitability. Men like Robert Harrison don't stop until they get what they want. And what he wanted was to get me out of his daughter's life. I started small. I opened a separate bank account. I photographed important documents. I recorded conversations. I researched the Harrison family businesses, their partnerships, their contracts with the city of Boston. As a contractor, I had worked on dozens of buildings around the city. I knew inspectors, engineers, civil servants. People Robert considered invisible, but who knew exactly where the skeletons were buried. 3 weeks ago, I discovered something interesting in the city archives. A pattern in the Harrisons' project approvals that didn't seem quite legal. Bids that were won with suspicious offers. Building codes that were flexibilized for certain projects. 2 days later, Michelle came home and announced that she wanted to talk about our future. She said she was tired of fighting with the family, that maybe we should re-evaluate whether we were compatible in the long run. Her words were new, but her voice was pure Robert Harrison. Now, sitting in my modest kitchen, wiping the dried blood from my nose, I finally understood that war had been officially declared long ago. I just hadn't realized I was already fighting it. I grabbed my laptop and opened a folder I had created with the innocent name Home Projects. Inside were subfolders organized by date, all filled with documents, photographs, and audio files. The first was called Beacon Hill Irregularities. The second, Questionable Municipal Contracts. The third, Questionable Relationships, Inspectors. There was a fourth folder I hadn't opened yet. It was called Plan B Emergency. Today, finally, it was time to open it. But as I clicked on the file, my phone rang. It was Michelle. "Joseph, you need to get back here now. My father wants to talk to you." Her voice sounded strange. Almost scared? "He's found out some things about you, Joseph. Things that could be very serious." I hung up the phone, smiling. Robert Harrison thought he had discovered something about me? How interesting. Because in a few hours, the whole world would discover a few things about him. 20 minutes later, I was back at the Harrison mansion, but this time not as a humiliated guest. I walked through the front door like a man who had finally decided to stop running. Robert was waiting in the library, a whiskey in his hand and a manila folder on the mahogany table. Michelle stood beside him, her eyes red as if she had been crying. When she saw me, she looked away. "Sit down, Joseph," Robert said, his voice heavy with a poisonous satisfaction. "We have a lot to talk about." I remained standing, arms crossed, waiting. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" He opened the folder and spread photographs across the table. They were pictures of me entering and leaving City Hall buildings, talking to inspectors, photographing documents. 3 months investigating my family. Very impressive for a simple bricklayer. Michelle finally looked at me. "Joseph, why did you do this? Why were you spying on my family?" The disappointment in her voice almost made me laugh. After everything they had done to me, she was disappointed that I had defended myself? "Because you've been planning something against me for months," I replied calmly. "And I'm not stupid." Robert slammed his fist on the table, making the crystal glasses rattle. "You're a parasite. An opportunist who took advantage of my daughter to try to get ahead in life." "Dad, please," Michelle began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Shut up, Michelle. You've made enough mistakes by marrying this worm. He turned to me, his eyes flashing with hatred. But it's over, Joseph. It's over. That's when Robert revealed his true plan. Over the past 2 months, he had hired a private investigator to dig up my entire life. He had discovered that I had done some unreported renovation work years ago when I was just starting out and needed the money. Minor tax violations that could result in heavy fines and even jail time. I've already spoken to my lawyers, he said, sliding more papers across the table. An anonymous tip will be made to the Internal Revenue Service tomorrow morning, along with evidence of all your illegal activities over the past 5 years. Michelle covered her face with her hands. Dad, this is going too far. Too far. Robert roared. This man tried to destroy our family. He deserves every second of prison he'll face. But there was more. Robert had connections to the contractors' union. With one word from him, I would be banned from any major construction project in Boston. My license would be revoked. My business, destroyed. And after you're in jail, he continued, savoring each word, Michelle will finally be able to marry someone worthy of her. Thomas Whitman has already shown interest, and his family owns the second-largest construction company in the state. That's when it all became clear. It wasn't just about getting me out of Michelle's life. It was about replacing me with someone who would bring financial advantages to the Harrisons. I looked at Michelle, searching for some sign that she would fight for our marriage, for our life together. Instead, I saw only resignation. Joseph, she said softly, maybe it's for the best. It never really worked, did it? We're from different worlds. Her words hit me like a second punch to the stomach. After 3 years together, after all the plans we had made, she was giving up on us without even trying to fight for it. Robert smiled triumphantly. See? Even she knows you're not right for this family. It was at that moment that something changed inside me. The anger I had controlled for so long finally found its focus. It was no longer about saving my marriage or proving my worth to the Harrisons. It was about justice. Are you two over? I asked calmly. Robert frowned, clearly expecting screams or pleas. What? I asked if you were done with your little act. I walked over to the table and picked up one of the photographs. It was me leaving City Hall last Tuesday. Because now it's my turn to talk. I sat down in the leather armchair across from them, crossed my legs, and smiled for the second time that day. Robert, you're right about one thing. I'm not just a bricklayer. Over the past 6 months, I've become something much more dangerous to you. I took out my phone and showed him the screen. It was an email with the subject line, Complete Dossier, Harrison Development Company. I've become an investigative journalist. His face paled. See, while you were spending money on private investigators to uncover my minor tax infractions, I was documenting your major tax crimes. I opened another file on my phone. Fraudulent contracts, rigged bids, building codes ignored with bribes. All documented, recorded, and verified by 3 independent sources. Michelle stood abruptly from her chair. Joseph, what are you saying? I'm saying that your father isn't just a successful businessman, Michelle. He's a criminal. I showed her another file. And tomorrow morning, when he makes his anonymous complaint about me, I'll be handing this dossier to the Boston Globe, the Herald, and the FBI simultaneously. Robert tried to grab the phone from my hand, but I pulled it away. Oh no, Robert. This is just one of 12 devices where this information is stored. Including cloud servers you'll never be able to access. The silence in the library was deafening. Only the ticking of the old clock on the wall could be heard. You don't have the guts, Robert muttered, but his voice was shaking. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the Harrisons' perfectly manicured garden. You know what the difference is between us, Robert? You underestimated the wrong man. I thought you were just arrogant. I didn't know you were also stupid. I turned to face him. You have until noon tomorrow to withdraw all threats against me and publicly apologize for what you did tonight. If you don't. I paused, savoring the moment. Well, let's just say that the Christmas season will be much more interesting for everyone in Boston. When I left the Harrison mansion that night, I didn't go home. I went straight to my lawyer's office, even though it was almost midnight. David Chun had been my legal representative since I started my company, and more importantly, he hated corruption as much as I did. "Joseph," he said, opening the office door still in his pajamas, "for God's sake, what time is it?" "The right time to finish off the Harrisons once and for all." Over the next 40 minutes, I spread out on his desk everything I had collected over the past 6 months. It wasn't just a few random photographs and documents. It was a complete, methodically organized file of every irregularity at Harrison Development Company. The preparation had begun after Michelle's birthday dinner. When I realized Robert was plotting something against me, I decided 2 people could play this game. But I had advantages he didn't know about. During my 12 years as a contractor in Boston, I had worked with virtually every department in City Hall. I knew inspectors, engineers, secretaries, file clerks. People Robert treated as invisible, but who had access to valuable information. Tommy Moretti, Chief Building Safety Inspector, owed me a favor from when I saved his job 3 years ago when he almost approved a faulty project. In return, he gave me access to the records of all inspections of Harrison projects over the past 5 years. The pattern was obvious to anyone who knew where to look. Safety issues that should have prevented approvals but were overlooked. Building codes ignored on specific projects. Always the same inspectors involved, always the same coincidences. Sarah O'Connor, from the bidding department, showed me something even more interesting. Harrison Development bids that arrived minutes before the deadline, always with exact amounts, not approximate exact, to beat other construction companies by minimal margins. "It's impossible to calculate these bids without knowing the competitors," Sarah told me, passing me copies of the documents. "Unless you have inside information." But the real bombshell came from Marcus Webb, a former accountant at Harrison Development who had been fired 2 years ago for restructuring. In reality, he had uncovered tax irregularities and questioned Robert about them. Marcus provided me with copies of everything. Offshore accounts, unreported payments, fictitious contracts with shell companies. Robert Harrison wasn't just corrupt, he was a sophisticated criminal who had built an empire through systematic fraud. For 6 months, I validated every document, checked every source, cross-checked information with at least 3 different witnesses. I didn't just want to accuse Robert, I wanted to bury him completely. David Chun finished reviewing the documents and looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Joseph, this is pure dynamite. You have enough material for federal criminal charges." "But," he paused, "the Harrisons have powerful connections. They will try to destroy you before this ever gets to court." As if he had been listening to our conversation, my phone rang. It was Michelle. "Joseph, my father has hired the best lawyers in Boston. He said he's going to sue you for defamation, invasion of privacy, and industrial espionage. He has connections in the FBI, the police, everywhere that matters." Her voice was shaky, frightened. "Michelle," I replied calmly, "your father has committed federal crimes. I'm not the one who should be worried." "You don't understand," she screamed. "He won't stop until he sees you in jail. He said he'll plant evidence if he has to, that he'll buy witnesses, that he'll make you wish you were never born." It was at that moment that I fully understood who the Harrisons were. Not just arrogant and corrupt, but genuinely dangerous. I hung up the phone and looked at David. Change of plans. We're not just going to sue them. We're going to do this publicly, quickly, and in a way they can't control. David frowned. "What do you have in mind?" "Do you know Jennifer Walsh from the Boston Globe? The investigative reporter?" "Sure, she's relentless." "And Marcus Thompson from Channel 5? The nightly news anchor. Joseph, what are you planning?" I smiled for the 3rd time that day. Robert Harrison wants a war. He's going to get one. But it will be fought on my turf, with the weapons I provide, at the time I decide. I picked up my phone and began typing a series of messages. If you're following this epic battle between David and Goliath and want to see how one man can take down an empire of corruption, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a moment of this historic revenge. The first message was to Jennifer Walsh. "I have a story that will bring down one of Boston's biggest corruption schemes." The second was to Marcus Thompson. "Do you want the exclusive that will define your career?" The third was to Special Agent Rodriguez of the FBI, whom I knew from a previous case. "Remember when you said we'd always have an open line if I ever found anything interesting?" David watched me with growing concern and admiration. Joseph, are you sure you want to do this? Once this information is out, there's no turning back. The Harrisons will try to destroy you in every way possible. I looked out the office window. It was snowing again, covering Boston with a pure white blanket. David, 3 years ago I got married thinking I would find a family. Instead, I discovered I married criminals who see me as a threat to their operation. I turned to face him. Robert Harrison thinks he can terrorize me with threats and intimidation. Michelle thinks she'll leave me for someone richer if I keep quiet and don't cause any trouble. I took the file and put it in the briefcase. They completely underestimated who they're dealing with. And tomorrow morning, when the newspapers hit the stands, all of Boston will find out exactly who the Harrisons are. It was 2 a.m. when I left David's office. At 6, the first calls would start. There was no turning back. 6 o'clock on the morning of December 26th. My phone rang at exactly the agreed time. Joseph, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Boston Globe. I read your dossier all night. This is going to bring down a lot more than the Harrisons. I smiled, taking my first sip of coffee of the day. That's exactly the intention, Jennifer. As I spoke to her, my second phone vibrated with a message from Marcus Thompson. The story will be on the 7 o'clock news. I have a cameraman positioned in front of Harrison Development. The third call was the most satisfying. FBI Agent Rodriguez, his voice heavy with urgency. Joseph, this material is gold. We're issuing search and seizure warrants for the entire Harrison Company. Operation begins in 2 hours. While I coordinated the methodical destruction of the Harrison empire, Robert was desperately trying to save his own skin. Michelle called me at 7:15 hysterical. Joseph, the feds are here. They have warrants for everything. My father is screaming that you forged documents, that this is a setup. Michelle, I replied calmly, tell your father he has 30 minutes before the press conference. If he wants to make a statement before this turns into a national circus, I suggest he use that time wisely. She hung up crying. At 8 o'clock, I turned on the television. Marcus Thompson was live in front of the Harrison Development Building as federal agents carried boxes of documents out of the building. In a coordinated operation, the FBI has executed search warrants at the headquarters of Harrison Development Company, following anonymous allegations of corruption and fraud that may be linked to millions of dollars in city contracts. My phone rang again. Robert Harrison, his voice unrecognizable with despair. Joseph, you don't know what you're doing. You're going to destroy innocent families. Michelle has nothing to do with this. Robert, I interrupted, you had your chance to redeem yourself yesterday. You chose to threaten my freedom instead of admitting your crimes. I can pay you. How much do you want? 1 million? 2 million? I can wire it right now. The bribe attempt was the last straw. Record this conversation, Robert. You just added another federal crime to your list. I hung up and immediately called Agent Rodriguez. You're going to want to hear the recording I just made. Robert Harrison tried to bribe me with $2 million 30 seconds ago. At 9 o'clock, the story exploded nationally. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all covering the Harrison scandal. Jennifer Walsh had expanded the investigation, uncovering connections to other Boston politicians and businessmen. But Robert still had a card up his sleeve. At 10:30, Michelle showed up at my door, accompanied by 2 men in dark suits. Joseph, these are my father's lawyers. They have a proposal. I let them in, curious to see how far Robert would go. The lead lawyer, an elegant man with graying hair, got right to the point. Mr. Joseph, my client is willing to reconcile. He admits he made mistakes and is prepared to compensate you generously. What kind of compensation? $3 million, transferred immediately. An executive position at Harrison Development. And a public apology. I pretended to consider the proposal for a few seconds. And in return? You drop all charges, publicly admit that you misread some documents, and will bury this whole thing. Michelle looked at me with hope in her eyes. For the first time in months, she seemed to really see me as her husband. Joseph, please. We can start over. I know I made mistakes, that I didn't stand up for you like I should have. But we can fix this. It was at that moment that I realized she truly believed I would do this for money. That 3 years of marriage could be bought for a few $1,000,000. Gentlemen, I said, rising from the chair, there's a small problem with that proposal. I walked over to the window, watching the FBI cars still parked in front of the Harrison Development Building in the distance. You still don't understand the full extent of what I've uncovered. I turned to face them. Robert Harrison didn't just commit tax fraud or rig municipal bids. He laundered money for criminal organizations through phantom construction projects. There are connections to federal politicians. There are links to drug cartels that used his buildings for trafficking operations. The silence in the room was absolute. The dossier I handed over to the FBI is 600 pages long. What came out in the press today is only the first 50. Michelle covered her face with her hands. You think this is about personal revenge? About a family feud? This is about dismantling a criminal organization that has been operating in Boston for decades. The lead lawyer tried to maintain his composure, but his voice trembled. You don't have enough evidence to support these charges. I smiled for the last time that day. I have 700 hours of recordings. Bank documents from 12 different countries. Statements from 43 witnesses, including former employees, bribed inspectors, and 3 informants from the FBI itself. I approached the center table and picked up a folder I had prepared specifically for this moment. And I have this. I opened the folder, revealing photographs of Robert in secret meetings with men I knew were under investigation for international drug trafficking. These photos were taken 2 months ago. Robert didn't know there were cameras installed in the restaurant where he met with Valdez and Kowalski. The lawyers recognized the names immediately. Valdez was wanted by the DEA. Kowalski was on the FBI's most wanted list. So no, gentlemen, $3 million won't solve this problem. In fact, I glanced at my watch. In exactly 15 minutes, a second federal operation will arrest Robert Harrison for association with criminal organizations. And you, who just offered me a bribe on his behalf, will probably be included on the list of suspects. Understanding washed over their faces in waves of growing horror. But if you like, I can call Agent Rodriguez and explain that you were hired without knowing the whole truth. Perhaps he'll be lenient. Michelle looked at me as if she were seeing a stranger. Who are you? The Joseph I knew would never be capable of this. You're right, Michelle. The Joseph you knew died on Christmas Eve, when his father punched me in the face and you asked me to apologize. I walked to the door and opened it. The man standing in front of you now is someone who finally understood that some battles cannot be won with kindness and patience. The lawyers rushed out. Michelle stood in my office for a few more minutes, tears streaming down her face. This isn't going to end well for anyone, Joseph. You're wrong, I replied softly. It's going to end exactly as it should have ended a long time ago. 15 minutes later, as I watched Robert Harrison being arrested in his own mansion on television, handcuffed in front of his neighbors and the national press, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. But that was just the first wave. The real tsunami was yet to come. 6 months after Robert Harrison's arrest, I was sitting on the porch of my new home in Martha's Vineyard, watching the sun set over the ocean. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was living in exactly the kind of place Robert always said I could never afford. The difference was that I had earned it honestly. Robert's trial was a national spectacle. CNN, Fox News, all the major networks covered every moment of what the press dubbed the Harrison scandal. 16 federal charges, including money laundering, tax fraud, bribery of public officials, and association with criminal organizations. The sentence was harsh, 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Evelyn Harrison, who always treated me like trash, lost everything. The mansion was confiscated by the federal government as part of asset recovery. Her jewelry, luxury cars, even the artwork she flaunted were auctioned off to pay fines and restitution. The last time I saw her, she was working as a receptionist at a small hotel in Albany. Our eyes met for a second as I passed through the lobby on a business trip. She looked away immediately, her arrogance replaced by silent shame. But it was Michelle's fate that surprised me the most. 3 weeks after her father's arrest, she showed up at my door. She looked different. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes were plain, and her eyes were swollen from crying. Joseph, she said, her voice breaking, I know I don't deserve a minute of your time, but I need to talk to you. I let her in, more out of curiosity than compassion. I've lost everything, she continued, collapsing onto the couch. My sponsors cancelled. The cosmetics company fired me. My friends abandoned me when they found out about my father's dirty money. I remained silent, letting her talk. But the worst part wasn't losing the money or the status. It was realizing that I've become just like him. Arrogant, cruel, blind to what really matters. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. You were the best man I ever knew, and I treated you like you were beneath me. I humiliated you, I cheated on you emotionally, I chose my rich, corrupt family over my honest, hard-working husband. Michelle pulled some papers out of her purse. I'm signing the divorce papers with no contest. You can have the house, the cars, everything. I don't deserve anything. What are you going to do now? I asked. I'm going to Oregon. My Aunt Sarah has a small bed and breakfast there. She said I can work for her, start over with a clean slate. Learn what it means to work honestly. For the first time in years, I saw genuine humility in Michelle. It wasn't the calculated posture she used to get what she wanted, but real regret. Joseph, she said, standing up to leave, I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect that. But I want you to know that you taught me something important. Integrity can't be bought. And I wasted the only chance I had to be with someone who truly had it. After she left, I sat there thinking about the irony of it all. She had finally learned lessons I had tried to teach her throughout our marriage, but it took losing everything for her to see clearly. As for me, the next 6 months were transformational in ways I never could have imagined. The Harrison scandal not only cleaned up Boston of a corruption scheme, but it also opened up massive opportunities in the construction industry. With Harrison Development out of the picture, dozens of city contracts became available to smaller, honest companies like mine. My company, Joseph Mason Construction, grew from 5 employees to 80 in just 4 months. Not only did we take over several projects from the former Harrison Development, but we also won federal contracts to rebuild the infrastructure that had been damaged by his corrupt practices. The difference was that we did everything by the book. No bribes, no shortcuts, no exploitation of workers. We paid fair wages, strictly followed safety codes, and made our financial transparency an example for the industry. The Boston Globe did a cover story on me 6 months after the trial. The headline read, "From Bricklayer to Tycoon, How Integrity Built an Empire." In the article, Jennifer Walsh wrote, Joseph Mason didn't just take down one of the most elaborate corruption schemes in Boston history. He proved that true success comes from character, not connections. His company now employs more people than the old Harrison Development, but with ethical practices that have set a new standard for the industry. But professional recognition wasn't the biggest reward. The moment that really changed everything happened during a dedication ceremony for a community center we built in Dorchester. It was a project Robert Harrison had abandoned years ago because it wasn't profitable enough. An elderly woman approached me during the celebration. "You're Joseph Mason, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "My name is Rosa Martinez. My grandson works for your company." She told me that her grandson had been arrested for petty crimes years ago, and no one would give him a chance. Not only did I hire him, but I paid for him to take technical courses, and today he is one of our most respected supervisors. "Mr. Mason," she said, holding my hand, "you didn't just build buildings. You build lives." My grandson has come home every day for the past 4 months, saying he finally found someone who believes in him. It was at that moment that I fully understood why everything had happened. Robert Harrison used construction to enrich himself and his friends, exploiting the system and people. I use construction to build communities, create opportunities, and build something lasting and honest. A year after the Christmas party that changed my life, I received an unexpected invitation. It was from the Boston Chamber of Commerce, inviting me to be the keynote speaker at their annual awards dinner. The theme was integrity in business, rebuilding trust. I accepted, but not for the recognition. I accepted because I wanted to tell a story that could inspire others. On the night of the event, I looked out at the audience of 300 Boston business leaders. Many of the faces were familiar, people who had been at that Christmas party, who had witnessed my humiliation. A year ago, I began my speech. A man punched me in the face at a Christmas party for accidentally spilling water on his shirt. His daughter, my wife at the time, told me to apologize or leave. The silence in the room was absolute. That night, many of you saw me as the loser. The simple bricklayer who didn't belong in the world of the rich and powerful. Some laughed. Others just looked away, embarrassed by the scene. I paused, looking directly at a few people I recognized from the party. But what no one realized that night was that I didn't walk out humiliated. I walked out determined. Determined to prove that integrity is more powerful than corruption. That honesty builds empires more lasting than cheating. I told the whole story, the investigation, the fall of the Harrisons, the rebuilding of my company. Robert Harrison tried to destroy me because he saw me as inferior. He measured my worth by the label on my clothes, the money in my bank account, the accent in my voice. What he didn't see was my character. The audience was completely absorbed. Today, Robert Harrison is serving a 25-year prison sentence. His company has been dissolved. His fortune has been confiscated. His reputation is destroyed. I smiled, not maliciously, but with the satisfaction of someone who had learned an important lesson. And me? I'm here in front of you, running a $100 million company, employing 400 families, building a legacy based on values that no one can take away from me. The applause began slowly, but grew into a standing ovation. The lesson I learned is simple: never underestimate the strength of a man or woman with integrity. They can knock us down temporarily, they can humiliate us publicly, they can even make us question our worth. I looked at every face in the audience. But they can't destroy us. Because our strength doesn't come from connections or money or status. It comes from who we are at our core. And that, no one can take away from us. When I finished speaking, dozens of people came up to greet me. But the most meaningful moment came when a young contractor introduced himself. Mr. Mason, my name is Carlos Rivera. I have a small renovation company. 3 months ago, a wealthy client tried to blackmail me into doing illegal work. I refused, and he spread lies about me around town. Carlos held an invitation in his hands. After hearing your story, I've decided I'm not going to give up. I'm going to fight the good fight, just like you did. I smiled and shook his hand. Carlos, that's all I wanted to hear. Keep doing the right thing, even when it seems impossible. Especially when it seems impossible. Today, 3 years after that fateful Christmas party, my life is completely different. Joseph Mason Construction is one of the largest construction companies in New England. We have offices in 6 states, and our brand has become synonymous with quality and integrity. I bought the old Harrison mansion when it went up for auction. Not to live in, it was too big for me, but to turn it into a training center for young people in the construction trade. Today, 50 young people a year learn a trade while living where once there was only arrogance and corruption. Robert Harrison still has 12 years left to serve. Michelle, as I understand it, is thriving at the Oregon Inn, where she married a local teacher and discovered the joy of a simple, honest life. As for me, I found something I never sought: peace. Not the peace of those who avoid conflict, but the peace of those who face injustice and emerge stronger. The peace of those who build something lasting with their own hands. If this story of reversal and overcoming adversity has inspired you, if you believe that integrity always wins in the end, don't forget to subscribe to the Twist and Revenge channel. We have dozens of stories like this. Ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice and transform their lives through determination and character. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how powerful your opponents are, it doesn't matter how impossible the situation seems. What matters is who you choose to be when no one is looking. And if you choose to be a person of integrity, the entire universe is conspiring in your favor. That's the only revenge that's really worth it. To live so well that your enemies become irrelevant.